Now, another philosopher that Dalcroze's method could be related to is René Descartes. It may seem trivial to relate Dalcroze's philosophy to that of Descartes, considering the impact of Descartes' thought experiments on nearly all later philosophies, having established a modern epistemological knowledge. In this sense, the connection between Descartes and Dalcroze would be broad, but not really that strong. However, Descartes' thought experiments are very significant to the Dalcroze method. So perhaps his findings weren't as significant to Dalcroze as his technique, his method was. Descartes says, "I had to raise everything to the ground and begin again from the original foundations if I wanted to establish anything firm and lasting in the sciences." Part of Descartes' thought experiments was basically this idea that knowledge can be systematically built up and broken down. And when we look at the method of Dalcroze, we see that that's exactly what he is trying to convey. Because Dalcroze is a proponent of what we would call elemental music. It's in his case, with incorporating movement into what he does, it's the idea that there's a difference between high and low, something like that. And once we have that sort of idea, then we can start to understand bigger concepts such as form. Because form is inherent in the differentiation that we see. For example, high and low. That creates an A-B form, as we could call it. So, for example, Dalcroze might have students do something where during the A section of a song, they have their hands raised in the air. But then when the B section comes along, they might put their hands on the ground. And then when the A section comes back up, they put their hands in the air again. It's about establishing the mental connection to the music. Now, there's two other parts of Dalcroze's method that are sometimes downplayed, but they're also extremely important. One of which is solfege. And solfege could be said to be an extension of much of his work with eurythmics. He uses eurythmics to connect movement and music. And he uses solfege in a similar way to connect similarly to connect pitch and movement. In regards to improvisation in the Dalcroze method, Polly Carter writes, "One of the three basic areas of experience in the Dalcroze plan is improvisation at the piano. The goal of piano improvisation is to give the same freedom at the instrument that students have in whole-body responses to music. This freedom is developed in part by assigning exercises in extemporaneous playing, performed in a given tempo and carried out at a brisk pace that does not allow for self-consciousness or negative attitudes." I feel that this part of Dalcroze's method, improvisation, and the way that he goes about improvisation is related to the philosophy of Kierkegaard in a way, Soren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard was, well actually let me compare it to Kenny Werner first. We all know Kenny Werner, those of us in this class. His basic idea is that in order to achieve a certain level of musicality, a certain confidence in musicality, it almost requires a sort of forced confidence. Although, I don't know if he would like using the word forced, but it's the idea that if you act confident, your art will come across confidently. It'll actually show up in your motions on the instrument. Now, it's related to Kierkegaard, I feel, because Kierkegaard was a Christian apologist and philosopher whose conception of the night of faith, as he called it, established the idea that it may be better to open oneself up to experience despite any and all reasons not to. This is very similar to what Kenny Werner is saying and what Dalcroze is saying in his idea of establishing a tempo and making kids improvise within that tempo. You don't slow down to accommodate them. You make them have a certain level of confidence. You don't let them second guess themselves. And Kierkegaard's conception of the night of faith was one whose belief was so strong that even fear of being wrong wouldn't stand in the way. So likewise, if a music teacher establishes an environment where a student is supported by the teacher and encouraged to express him or herself, then that student will not likely be dissuaded by fears of being wrong. Dalcroze felt that one of the greatest ways to get students motivated and to get students to make the mental connections was to have the mental connections between the music and the movement and the improvisation and the solfege, all that. He felt that the best way to do it was to give the students a certain level of confidence that what they were doing was positive, that they were heading in the right direction. So, to speak about philosophy a little bit, we use the term validity to describe whether or not something fits, whether or not something works. Validity doesn't necessarily imply truth. However, validity works within a certain context, and something can be valid within a context without being true. Now, philosophical principles are considered valid based on their conceptual clarity, consistency, rational coherence, comprehensiveness, compatibility with established facts and theories, and also having the support of compelling arguments. The philosophy behind the Dalcroze method succeeds in fulfilling each of these objectives. Although the Dalcroze method is not a philosophy in and of itself, we can still see the effects of philosophical underpinnings. Its clarity is easily detected in the ease of the method's transmission and its use of uncomplicated terminology.